Okay, let's go ahead and practice with variables, constants, and scope. I'm going to go ahead and use this same HTML that we used earlier. The JavaScript really won't have anything to do with this HTML, but it's just a place for us to go ahead and look at some of the variables just using the console. So I'm going to go ahead and add a JavaScript file. I'm going to call it variables and constants.js. And we're going to externally link that up with our script tag. And because I'm doing it in the head, I do want to use defer. We'll use the src attribute to reference where that is and what the name of this file is. And there's, okay. And then we will get the ending script tag, no content, because we are just referencing it externally. Okay, now we can go ahead and use some variables and constants in here. Let's start with a const keyword for a constant, and sometimes you will see constants all capitalized. So we'll capitalize it this time, and pi is always 3.14. So that's a great use of a constant. That value will never change. Let's set up a variable of radius. So we're going to be getting in the area of a circle, and radius definitely can change from circle to circle depending on the size. So we'll start with a radius of 3. Now the area of a circle is r squared times pi. So we're going to set up another variable called area. And we're going to use now our two variables in our calculations. Radius times radius times pi. Notice we've got semicolons at the end of each of our statements, which is what you should be doing in JavaScript. And we can now, we assign these first two constants and this variable, 3.14 and 3, and now we're assigning a new variable and a calculation. So the result of this calculation will then be assigned to area variable. We want to go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. We'll just put it in the console with console.log, which is a object with a method reference, a dot method reference. And we'll learn more about that later. But basically, it's just saying we're going to put this on our console, the result of area, or what the value of area holds. So if we go back to our HTML and look at that in Live Server, and we look at our DevTools and we go to the Console tab, we will see that there is an error. And so I'm going to check my spelling. Variables, constants. There we go. There should be an S right there. There we go. All right. So it's console logging what area. So after the 3 times 3 times 3.4, we get the 28.6. Line 6 is where that console logged, and so we can see that. Now, later in code, we might want to change the value of radius. You don't have to set it up again with the keyword let because it's already been set up, but we might want to reassign it a bigger radius, maybe 20. And then when we rerun the calculation in the console later, we'll see that we get a bigger number because of our bigger circle or our bigger radius. So that's a good example of kind of using that constants and variables in some calculations. Another thing to be aware of is variables and constants are case sensitive. So if I were to put a lowercase pi, it would not recognize that. So be careful with case sensitivity with variables and constants, as well as if I went ahead and tried to reassign my constant a different value, I would also get an error because you cannot reassign a new value to a constant. That's the purpose of a constant, is that the value will not change. Another thing to be aware of as well is if I later down in code, I refer to it as pi, for some reason I misspell it and reassign something to it, it's going to assume that that's a brand new variable. Even though I didn't use const or let, it's going to think I've created a new variable. So if you misspell a constant or variable later, it might think it's a brand new variable. All right, let's take a look at some interesting things that might happen with variables constants. So I'm in the ponder, and I should have grabbed that code, but let's grab this code here. And this is setting up two more constants. This constant is called 1, and it's being assigned the number 1. This constant is 2, and it's being assigned a string or a text or character 2. And we know that because it's got the quotes around it. So kind of different data types going on there. But we didn't have to tell it what data type it was when we set those two up. But if we go ahead and do some math and assign it to a new variable called result, and we say 1 times 2, then we can see that we can console log this one. And it will go ahead and do that multiplication, 1 times 2. Now this was a string, so I'm going to just put a little comment here. This is called type coercion. And that means it's JavaScript is saying, well, they're trying to do multiplication on this string, so I'm going to assume that they want a 2 there and go ahead and let that happen. So it can be flexible to a point that sometimes it's not as strict as a lot of the other programming languages. It will kind of try to assume what's going on there and do what it can. However, let's take a look at this. If we go ahead and say, let's have the result be 1 plus 2. So here's an exception to this little rule. And we go ahead and console log our new result out at this point. Then we see it comes up with 12, and that is not 1 plus 2. You might have expected it to be 3, but it's showing a 1 concatenated with a 2. So it's just kind of putting those two together. So anytime you have a string with the plus, it's going to assume that is concatenation, meaning just shove those two together, put the 1 right next to the 2. And that's why it looks like there's a 12 there. So in this case, with the plus sign, it's not using it as an addition or a sum operator. It is using it as a concatenation. So you would have to go in and say, I really want to see this one as a number. You could use something like this, whoops, or %. Oh, goodness. And now it will see it as a number, and you can go ahead and put the 3 in there. This will happen a lot with any numbers that the user puts into an input box. We'll see that later when we talk about forms. They always come in as strings, so a lot of the time you will have to convert those over to numbers if you want to do math on them. Okay, so that's just with the plus, because they'll see it as concatenation instead. So a few little different things that might happen as you're looking at that. Let's go ahead and look at the scope. So let's copy this code right here and paste that in. Okay, so let's look at scope now. Just putting little comments in there so we know what we're looking at here. All right, so we have a global variable called course. We're assigning it this string, CSE 131. It is global because it is at the very outside level. It's not inside any conditional. It's not inside of a function. So it's kind of just at the outside of everything. So no matter where course is referenced, you should be able to see it. Now we have a block of code here, and we can see that it's got curly braces. Whatever's happening on the inside of these curly braces, if we declare a variable inside of here, it's only going to be recognized inside. If we try to reference it outside of those curly braces, it's not going to work. So we can, when we set up the inside this if clause, we're going to set up student in here. Therefore, course, which is global, can be seen, and student can be seen. Again, course is definitely going to be able to be seen here, inside or outside of the block, but you cannot reference student, which was declared inside of the block. It's not going to work. So let's go ahead and save that and just take a look at what that looks like in the console. And we see the first three work just fine, but this last one is not working because we cannot see student when it's inside of a block like that. Okay, so a little bit about block and global scope and variables and constants.